I was one of those people that I don't know if I ever did it consciously, but I went out of my way to make sure that I raised my children the way a family should be raised. I kind of did it the exact opposite of everything that my family did when I was growing up.
Hello, you are listening to NPE Stories. This is a podcast where NPEs can share their story. I am your host, Lily, and I found out I was an NPE through an Ancestry DNA test that changed my life forever. NPE is a term that stands for Not Parent Expected or Non-Paternal Event. This means that one or more of our parents are not who we believe them to be. NPE Stories is a podcast where NPEs can share their story of what their original family was like, how they found out they were an NPE, and what their journey has been like since the day they found out. And welcome to episode 209. And today I am speaking with Bill. Hi, Bill.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you so much for doing this with me. I appreciate getting to speak with a male NPE. I don't speak with them as much, and I don't know if you're in any of the Facebook forums, but it's always nice when we get to talk to a man and get their perspective, because it seems like 90% of us are women that are that are comfortable sharing our feelings, but so I really just relish when I get a chance to sit down virtually with a man and talk about it.
Yeah, it's that cultural thing. Men normally don't like talking about their feelings. Guess what? You found one who does.
Oh, good. So, have you listened to the podcast lately? Do you know the basic format of this?
I do, yes.
Okay. So we're going to kind of start at the beginning, and I don't know anything about Bill, so let me know about from your childhood, your family of origin, who was in it, and what your raising family was like.
Yeah, sure. Well, my name is Bill. I was raised in New Jersey, born in 1961, so that puts me at 63. I was a fourth child. My mom had four children, four boys from 56 to 61, so I was the fourth child. She was married to my birth certificate father, and then somewhere early on after I was born, they broke up. Now, as I tell my story, the oddest thing you're going to find, at least odd for me anyway, is a lot of the things I talk about, I'm getting from, I think, either secondhand knowledge or things that I believe happened. I come from a family that just didn't talk about anything. We were raised in a lower class, inner city environment, lived in apartment buildings, lived in the projects for a while, moved around a lot. We moved 14 times in 17 years. Sometimes it was our choice, sometimes it was the landlord's choice. Generally, it was a halfway decent, or say pretty decent upbringing as far as my world was concerned. I was one of those kids. I played Little League for a couple of years and played stickball in the streets and touch football and hung out with my friends on the railroad tracks and, kind of the typical boy stuff growing up. But in the house, it was pretty tumultuous. It was my I'll call him my father now, was an abusive alcoholic. So we had a lot of fights in the house, a lot of fisticuffs in the house. Like I said, my mom and him broke up, I believe, right around when I was born, and I think that might be part of the story. So there's four boys, one mother and father. Early on, she left him. Her story is part of this story, so I'll go back in time. She was raised in Pennsylvania. There was an incident when she was, I believe, around 5, a molestation incident. So she was involved in that. Somebody, I don't know who it was. So obviously that had to work on her psyche somewhere. And then her parents got divorced when she was young, and she had a very odd custody battle. The custody battle was who was going to get her. I don't want her, you have her, kind of thing. Oh yeah, that was tough. I would imagine. So then she was raised in a foster home with a very strict couple. And then at 18, the day turned 18, she left. She basically ran away from the place, moved to New Jersey to be with her mom and her grandmother. She slept with this guy when she first met him, turned out to be her husband. And the reason she said she married him was because she told her mom she slept with him and was, oh, you have to marry him. So I don't know if there was ever any love between them. But he had a decent job. He worked at a shipyard in Hoboken. And so like I said, he had a drinking problem. So that was always a problem for them. Here's where it gets a little stranger. I don't know anything about their marriage. I don't know when they were married. I don't know anything about the divorce. I've never seen wedding pictures. I've never seen any pictures of them together. It was something that was never, ever discussed. So growing up, it was a very, I guess, well, okay, so mom either leaves or gets thrown out. I'm not sure yet. When I was a baby, she ends up marrying a couple years later, but when I was probably 6 or 7, ends up marrying another abusive drunk. She was one of those people that thought that she could fix people. So she thought she could fix him as well. So she was with him for a couple years. And then when I was about 13, she had an affair with my stepfather's best friend and and got pregnant with my sister. And it turns out to be a trend with my mom, unfortunately. And that'll be part of the story as well. She was a little on the promiscuous side. I don't want to, let's say I'm trying to, I want to
Yep.
make it sound, trying to make it sound chronologically correct. So growing up, it was a decent home, very poor, struggling for food for a lot of times, moving around a lot. But overall, I never look back at my childhood and think that it was a bad childhood. I look back and I think it was a good childhood, even with all the problems. Let's see. So mother, father, stepfather, three older brothers, myself, and then my sister comes along later. In my head, it's kind of like two separate lives. Up until my sister was born, it was like that's my childhood, and then at around just before 14, my sister's born, and then 3 years later, I graduate high school and go in the military, and then move away from New Jersey. So kind of like two separate stories there.
Did your dad stay in your life even after they broke up?
No, not really. He was very close. He was only, maybe a mile or two away from our house. And the only interaction that I recall having was always my mom calling him for child support, because back in the 60s and 70s, the courts weren't good at enforcing childhood or child support laws. So he was supposed to pay her 50 something dollars a week for the 4 boys, and he rarely did. So she was always calling him, trying to get money for food for us. So I would either listen in on a conversation, or sometimes he would agree to, give us some money, and me and one of my brothers, would go over to his house to pick up the money. Other than that, I only know of a handful of incidents where I was actually physically in a room with him.
Okay. Did you ever have any warning signs that your dad wasn't your dad?
Not so much that he wasn't my dad, but I was one of those kids that I was absolutely convinced I was adopted growing up. My brothers all have blonde hair and blue eyes. I have brown hair, brown eyes. My mom, the only time I ever mentioned that, she would say, well, you took after me because she had brown hair, brown eyes. So I guess I was satisfied with that. Looking back now, it's absolutely hilarious. Knowing what I know now, you look at pictures, I look nothing like my brothers. It's so blatantly obvious, but growing up, you don't think of something like that. And there was one incident where I mentioned earlier where my mom would call my dad asking for money, and there was one incident where he said, "Okay, I'll give you some money, but I'm not going to give you any money for that little one. He's not mine anyway." I was on the extension in the house, and I was heartbroken. Why would my dad not want to? Why would he say something like that? It didn't dawn on me. I never thought, wow, does that mean he's not my dad? I just thought he's mean. I did, I didn't put two and two together. And later on, when I tell you the story about how the NPE part was revealed, you'll understand how sometimes I could have my head in the sand. But he blatantly said I'm not his child, and it didn't even dawn on me that I wasn't. And the only other thing, growing up, I have fairly, I guess say fair skin, but I'm definitely darker than my brothers. And in the summertime, I would get amazingly dark because a lot of, growing up, you're run around without your shirt on and you're in the sun playing outside all the time. I would get very, very dark. And people would always ask me, are you Italian or are you Spanish? And I would say neither one. And you'll see later on, it turns out I am. But I never understood why my skin color was so much different than my brother's. So they were warnings, but not to me. I was completely oblivious to it.
How did you find out you were an NPE?
So many years later, I grow up, I move off, I go into the military. I spend 13 years in the Air Force, and I marry my wife in 89. I graduated high school 79, married my wife in 89. I'm still in the military. We have two daughters. We raised them. Um, and the part of my story is that I love telling is I did the exact opposite. If you if you know about family dynamics, a lot of times you'll see that a person from a broken home usually has a broken home themselves. I was one of those people that I don't know if I ever did it consciously, but I went out of my way to make sure that I raised my children the way I thought a family should be raised. I kind of did it the exact opposite of everything that my family did when I was growing up. So now they're adults, and I decided to get into genealogy. I've been wanting to do it for years. With a my last name is Lewis, and it's such a common last name. I put it off for years because I figured it would be very difficult because I had such a common last name. Very long story short, it took me 2 days to find out that I was related to George Washington, Meriwether Lewis from the Lewis and Clark expedition.
Wow.
Yeah, my 9-time great grandfather, his brother married George Washington's sister in Mount Vernon. So I had my brothers over for dinner to reveal the news to them that we're from a fairly famous family. If you do any searching for Lewises in the Washington Revolutionary era, you'll see several Lewises are mentioned, and we're direct descendants of those people. So I had them over to dinner, broke the news to them. Of course, the first thing they said was, "Are we rich?" I said, "No." I said, "No, we're not rich." I said, "It's just past many, many years ago." And then, so I was quite proud of my research and did the DNA test. I got it as a Christmas gift, like a lot of people do, a couple years after this. And the results come back and talk about head in the sand. It says half the people in my tree, or with the centimorgans, are either Garcia or Sanchez or Latino Spanish names, and it struck me really odd. Like that makes no sense at all. And the closest person turns out it is a first cousin who I've never heard of before. So in my head, the first thing I think of was, well, maybe my dad messed around on mom and had other children. So I call my sister and I tell her the story, and I tell her I mentioned it says that I'm half Spanish or from Portugal, Spain and Portugal, and Cuba. And she said, wow, that's really weird. And I said, well, it's probably because, my dad probably messed around. Remember, her dad and my dad are two different people. So she's but probably messed around. So 2 years go by. And in my head, I still did, up until that moment, didn't put it together. And then I got an email from Ancestry saying that they were able to distinguish now between the maternal side of the family of the DNA and the paternal side. So I log on and I open it up and I go see the paternal side, and there is absolutely nothing that has any relationship with my father, who I thought was my father. He was supposed to be English and Dutch, and everybody on his side of the family is either from Middle Eastern or mostly Spanish, Portuguese, or Cuban. So it hit me like a ton of bricks. This guy's not my dad. So I immediately I call my sister, and she says, "It's about time you figured it out." I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "When you told me 2 years ago about it, I knew right away that he couldn't be your dad." I said, "Why didn't you tell me?" I figured you needed to figure it out on your own. So that was the day that my world changed. I realized right then and there that the guy who I thought was my dad couldn't possibly be my dad. That's how I found out.
That must have been shocking.
Oh yeah, your entire world gets turned upside down. When I first did the DNA test, I got a email from that first cousin who I never heard of before, and she had asked, do you have any idea why we're related? I said, no, I have no idea, and I didn't hear from her again. And then when I finally got the realization that that I was an NPE, reached out to her again, and she was she emailed back immediately, and she said, "Would you like to? I give you my phone number." She said, "I could tell you who your dad is." I got goosebumps again, just like I did that day. So I did. I reached out to her. We spoke that afternoon. I was in the supermarket, and when she texted back, and I sat down at a little bench that was there, and we had a long conversation. She introduced herself. I introduced myself, and she gave me my entire life history. It turns out her side of the family, my father, knew who I was, knew of me, never reached out to me, or if he did, because we moved around a lot, maybe he couldn't. He had a picture of me, and we
Oh.
told everybody, this is my son Billy. Uh,
Oh.
so there must have been some kind of relationship between my mother and him, even after the affair, because the only way to get a picture of me would have been from her. The story is my mother and my aunt lived upstairs. My mother's dad says she was upstairs, and they were friends. And this guy would come to visit her. Her brother would come and stay sometimes for several months. Somewhere during one of those visits, my mom and him got together and created me. And nobody, as far as I know, nobody in my family knew anything of this. My mom passed in '89, took it to her grave. And so she had the affair with this Cuban fella. He came from Cuba in the '50s, and we're talking late 1960 now. So she had three little boys, one of them still in diapers, and she had an affair with this guy. I don't. Here's where I go back to her upbringing. I think with the molestation when she was young and the lack of love she had growing up, I thought maybe she had some kind of issue with love, and
Mhm.
I don't know. It's all speculation on my part,
Mhm.
unfortunately, but I think maybe that might have had something to do with it. I don't know. Plus the fact that the husband she's with was an alcoholic and abusive. In the story, when I was talking to my first cousin, she did mention him, my birth certificate dad. She says the story we have is that he was a very mean man, and we knew that he was beating your mother, beating you guys. But she gave me the entire background. She knew the house we lived in. She mentioned the address. She knew my mother's name. She knew my father's name. She remembered. She said she knew of the children. Her having a couple little boys, and then her entire side of the family when I was born knew of me. Knew that I was out there. Like I said, and this was all a revelation within 24 hours from the
Oh.
time I realized that I was an NPE to the time I knew who my father was, had pictures of him, knew his life story. All this stuff happened in a 24-hour period, and it just turned my world upside down.
Oh, I can't even imagine. Yeah, your mind just had to have been blown getting all this information in.
Yeah, yeah,
They all knew about you.
yeah, yeah. His entire side of the family, everybody knew about me. He had two sisters and a brother. They all knew about me. A lot of their kids knew about me. Like I said, he would show people a picture of me, like the proud dad, say, "Here's my son Billy." Early on, I believe I was born in '61. I think around '65, he moved to Miami, living in he's from, like I said, he's from Cuba, so he moved to Miami, lived in the Cuban community down there until he died in 2012.
Mm.
Um, yeah, I never met him, never knew anything about him, of course, because my story is only 2 years ago. I guess the NPE thing happened is when I finally put it together.
So now that you have found out you're Cuban, have you been the sort of MPE where you're starting to focus more on that culture, read more about that culture, or do you still feel you are the ethnicity that you were beforehand?
It's yeah, it's a good question. It's an interesting question. Yeah, I mean, I I went to a local Cuban restaurant to see what kind of food there was. Fortunately, I walked in and it was a very Cuban restaurant, and the people didn't even speak English. So
Yeah.
my wife and my daughter, we sat down and we ordered some stuff, sat down and ate, and it just felt so out of place.
Mm-hmm.
And that made things even more difficult because I was raised thinking that I was Northwest European, English, Irish, things like that,
Yeah.
German, and finding out that half of my heritage is Cuban. And my grandmother, my biological dad, his mother actually came from the Middle East somewhere, I believe, Lebanon or Syria.
Oh.
Uh, yeah, so there's an entire side of my life and my world that I know nothing about. And yeah, I've done reading on Cuba, and the more I delve into it, the more I realize I'm at a place, and that bothers me immensely because it seems like there's an entire world there. Because growing up in New Jersey, there's a section which was only a couple blocks away, another town that was a complete Cuban community where you can go in there and never hear a word of English. That's, in my head, that's where I belonged. Now that I think about it, I belonged there as well as my world. And it seems like I've been cheated out of that entire side of my life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you
Uh,
really have.
yeah, yeah.
And you probably weren't were you raised? I mean, I'm assuming you're not bilingual. Or maybe you do speak
No,
Spanish. I don't know.
no, not bilingual at all. No, the closest we ever came was maybe one or two words in German because from my mom's side. But other than that, no, there was no involvement in the Spanish community at all. Hey, that's getting back to that one portion. Remember, I mentioned when people would ask me when I was a kid, were you either Italian or Spanish? It turns out I was Spanish, what we call Spanish, and I never knew it. In the summertime, like I said, if I want to, I get amazingly dark, and I probably could fit in that community very well, but I never knew I was supposed to.
Yeah. Do you have any siblings or new siblings, I should say, that you have found out about?
There is one other person that was in my DNA, or sorry, in the ancestry, the DNA part of it, that was very close. I've tried reaching out to her, and she doesn't seem to have any interest. If I put things together, I believe I had another half brother through my biological dad, and it doesn't appear when I brought it up to the cousin that filled me in on everything. There's no knowledge of him in their story, so he might have had another child. It appears he had another child, a boy who would have been a year or two older than me. He's passed, and he has a. Let's see, I think that would be the girl I'm talking about that I could reach out to, that I tried to, would be my half brother's daughter.
Mhm.
I think. I got to think
Yeah,
about it now. It's been a
I
while.
know.
It's been a while since I thought about it. I forget. Anyway, it seems like I would have had a half brother who passed away just before I found out that I was an NPE.
Ugh.
So I missed him as well. So one of the biggest struggles for me is trying to put these pieces together. And there is literally no one that knows the story other than the stuff that I've learned from that first cousin. I asked her, I said, there is one person alive that could fill that where these stories came from, but he's up in age, and he took everything that he would have told me, he told me basically through her. So there's no other parts that they can fill in. So with my mom, I've gone through anger and disappointment and things like that with her in my head. She's passed, like I mentioned. So I the not knowing part is so difficult.
Yeah.
Not knowing why she did what she did. The story always was that she left him, my father, my birth certificate father, because of his abuse. The
Yeah.
timing tells me that he might have thrown her out because he obviously knew about her affair. And I finally brought it up with my one surviving older brother. We lost my oldest brother this year, and I was at his house for the funeral, and we
Oh.
finally talked about it a little bit. And he doesn't think that's what happened. I forget what he said the reason was, but timing wise, in my head, it sounds more likely that he might have threw her out because she ended up moving to another close city, moved, not too far away, in with her mother and grandmother with the four little boys. And he had like I said, he had a fairly decent job. So why would a woman do that in the mid 60s or early 60s, leave a husband who's providing for her to go and try to struggle on her own. In my head,
Yeah.
and that's the problem. The problem is I don't know, and I'll never know because anybody that can answer the questions are dead. So
That's so frustrating. Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
everyone is passed, and
hmm
when you said your birth father died in 2012.
Yeah, my birth father
Mhm.
died in 2012. My birth certificate father died in 87. My mother passed in 89. They were both very young. Yeah.
Did you ever find an obituary for your birth father?
Nope. I looked. I put my ancestry hat back on again, my
Yeah.
genealogy hat back on again, and I delved, and I couldn't find anything.
Oh,
I found.
bummer.
I think I found the manifest of him coming over, the boat that he came over on. I think I might have found that, but other than that, I know nothing about him other than I got from that first cousin. Mm. He never married. He was with a woman for quite a while down in Miami. They spent a lot of years together, and there was a fire at his house, and all his belongings, everything that from his past, got burned in a fire. So probably that picture of little Billy might have got burned as well. I don't know, but I'd love to find that picture just to even see, which picture it was.
Right. I wonder if you could get in touch with that woman he spent time with, if she's still around.
I hadn't thought about it. Yeah, I might.
I don't
Maybe I'll
know.
reach out to my cousin and see if I could delve that way. That's it. That's a good. It's a good question. I'll have to look into that. What's really funny now is pictures wise, being the fourth boy. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but if you ever look at a family, the first boy, first child, 1,000 pictures. Second child, 300 pictures. Third child, 100. Fourth child, me, you got 5.
Oh.
I literally have more pictures of my newly discovered side of the family than I do of my growing up side of the family. It's really odd. Yeah, she's
Oh.
provided me with tons and tons of pictures. I even have a picture of him, my birth biological dad, when he was, I think, 12 or 14. And the sad part is, I look nothing like. I don't see any resemblance. So I don't see a resemblance on my growing up side of the family, and no resemblance on my biological side of the family. It's so weird. I just like, I don't fit anywhere.
Yeah.
It's really odd.
Have you met that first cousin in person at all, or have you had?
No, no.
No. Okay.
She's an amazingly pleasant person. She's a sweetheart, and there are not plans, but there are talk to either go to her place or her come out here. We'd love to meet. She's been so nice to me. She she's been nicer to me than anybody on my other side of the family. It's really weird. Growing up, we, like I mentioned earlier, we never talked about anything. So, like I said, I raised my family the best I could, opposite of the way I was raised, and I also talk differently than they did. Growing up, we never talked about anything. We never talked politics. We never talked religion, current events, family history. Nothing was ever talked about. So I've taken the other tactic now, and all I do is talk. If I have something dramatic happen in my life, my family gets really, really tired of hearing of it because my defense or my therapy is to talk about it. So I had a friend who committed suicide in front of me in the early 80s. I just drove everybody nuts because that's all I talked about
Oh,
for years, because that's my therapy. So,
right.
and it's so
Oh,
different from growing up. And then you'd mentioned, just a little side note, you mentioned were there any signs when I was a kid. That was one of them. The fact that I wanted to talk, but I never had anybody to talk to in my family. I was a completely different person than my brothers. They were street gangs. One of them spent time in a youth home. They weren't bad kids, but they were street kids. Me, I didn't get any. I wasn't a good kid. I stole from my boss and things like that when I got older in my teens. Working at a deli and things. So I wasn't a good kid, but I was nothing like them, and I knew that. I knew that's why I always thought I was adopted, because I'm like, why am I so different from these people?
yeah.
Uh, I felt like I was in a different family than where I was supposed to be.
Mm,
Uh, and I don't think like that now. I know, my mom was my mom. As angry as I am with her, she was still my mom.
yeah.
And she favored me over the others. You ask any of them, Billy was a favorite. I chalked it up to the fact that I was the youngest. I think it was because of the history. I tried to think back, is there any sign from her? And it was nothing. She never let on that this had happened. And that's part of
Wow.
the, I guess that's part of the anger I have with her is like, why didn't you tell me? You know?
Yes, because if she obviously he knew he had a picture of you, so there had to have
Hmm.
been some form of communication, if at least
Sure.
passing on to his sister or something.
Mhm. Right.
That's so frustrating that you never got the, even after they broke up, the chance to
Yeah.
be with him. Although I shouldn't talk. My parents divorced when I was only a year old, and I also
Mhm.
am an NPE, and I'm like, why didn't my mom contact my birth father?
Yeah.
It's the same
Yeah.
thing. It's the same
Yep.
questions.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you have now spent 2 years kind of piecing this together, finding this
Hmm.
stuff out.
Hmm.
What have you found helpful with your healing? What is something you could pass on to another
Um,
brand new NPE?
well, the only thing it is what I mentioned already was one of them. It was, talking about it. My wife and my daughters have been amazing. My daughters have been great because it affects them too. They're Cuban. They didn't know they were Cuban.
Oh, yeah.
They're a quarter Cuban, I guess. Uh,
Yeah.
so they were amazing. They had questions. I gave them every answer I possibly could. So talking with the family, my wife, like I said, she's been amazingly kind and gentle about this,
Mm.
listening to me go on and on and on about it. So yeah, talking about it is amazingly important, and that
Yeah.
helped me out a lot. The other side of it for me is I'm a Christian, and my faith. Without my faith, I don't want to get into religion, of course, but my faith is by far the thing that got me through. I have a friend at church, a guy named Dirk, who is adopted, and he is associated with a couple groups, adoptee groups, support kind of things, and he's tried to get me involved in it, but that's not something that you mentioned in the beginning how a lot of times women are involved. There's a lot of women will
Yep.
talk about it. Well, the couple times that I've tried to reach out, I just don't feel comfortable because it's generally me as the only guy and then a bunch of women. Not that
Yep.
not that I'm anti-woman or anything.
Yeah.
It's just not comfortable for me.
Yep. Yep. I get it.
You put me in a room with a bunch of guys that are in my situation, I'll talk about it forever.
Mm.
I just don't feel comfortable doing that. But so I have my friend Dirk. He's been a great help for me as a friend from church, and so yeah, me talking about it and my faith in Christ is the things that got me through.
And Bill, in the interest of privacy, I won't be giving out any email information for you, but if anyone wants to pass along supportive emails to npestories@gmail.com, I will send them to Bill. Bill, thank you so much for setting this time aside and sharing what you've been going through the last couple of years. I just really appreciate talking with you today.
Oh, it was my pleasure, and I got to thank you for giving folks like us the opportunity, the platform to be able to do something like this. What you do is amazing, and I thank you so much for that.
These stories are here for us to identify with. If you are an NPE and would like to share your story, email npestories@gmail.com. You do not have to give any identifying information. If you are an NPE and would like to share your story, I'd like to hear from you. Subscribe to this podcast to hear more. Come heal with us.